across the ditch as well. I know we've got a few from New Zealand that are joining us. We're just going to give a couple of minutes just for everyone to be able to log on, deal with any last minute issues we might have, and then we're going to be jumping into the training nice and quickly. Hopefully everyone, as we mentioned, is having a really good morning and it started off on a successful note just prior to game day unfolding on Saturday. So it looks like we're having no last minute troubleshooting problems at the moment, which is good to see. What we want to say firstly and foremost is a big thank you to Auctions Live for facilitating and making this happen. It really does speak to their commitment to the industry, what they're doing to upskill those partner agencies that do work with them. I know our team here in Apollo in Australia and Apollo in New Zealand as well can really speak to the quality of the work that the Auctions Live team have done and continue to do. And again, their passion for the industry and their passion for auctions at large is a big reason behind their being so successful in the present time. The idea of these sessions is really to talk about auctions. There's no hidden agenda behind what we're going to unpack, and the idea is to go all the way through the auction campaign. So we're going to start today with our first session talking about listing auctions. Why do we list an auction? How do we list an auction? And how do we overcome objections that are likely to get thrown at us by sellers? And then heading forward from there, how do we run a campaign effectively? How do we deal with inquiry, generate offers, and run a really good day to make sure it's a great representation of our brands. Now, there is a live chat functionality here. So again, if you have got any questions at any stage, we do want you to use that chat functionality. Any objections or concerns, queries, comments, that you do have at any stage of the training, we'd love to hear from you. So simply just pop it in that live chat functionality and we can make sure we solve them nice and quickly for you. But this training is designed to be interactive. It's certainly not a lecture by any stretch of the imagination. So again, we'd love to hear your feedback at all stages throughout this session. I do believe this session is going to be available post the event as well. So if you do want to have a look at this post, maybe you missed a few notes here or there that you might want to pick back up on, certainly that's going to have some availability for you to do that as well. But with that in mind, we're going to jump straight into it this morning. So a very good morning, as we mentioned, to everyone that has joined us. Thrilled to have a whole lot of people here in Australia online. I know we've got quite a few of the Kiwis over the ditch as well. Apollo Auctions, for those that don't know, is a company that I founded back in 2013. Full-time independent real estate auctioneers. And one thing about, I think, all the people that work for our business is we love auctions. Auctions are being the core of our being now for coming on 7 to 8 years. And really, it's the passion of what we do. One of the beauties about being an independent auctioneer is that you get to work with some of the very best agencies out there, you get to work with some of the very worst, and you get to work with everybody in between in some very strong markets and some markets that are not so strong. And what we try and bring with our training, I guess, is an insight to those businesses that we've worked with that have been successful and some tips and techniques that might make our campaigns just run a little bit smoother. Shout out as well to our team across the ditch, spearheaded by Robert Tulp, Tim O'Byrne, who are doing some fantastic things over in New Zealand. I know that I had a $1 auction or a $1 reserve auction just a couple of nights ago that was a screaming success. Unsurprisingly, sold under the hammer. So well done to those guys. And for all those that have joined us across the ditch as it's approaching lunchtime over there, we thank you also for your company. It's greatly appreciated. So we're going to jump straight in this morning. This morning's session is all about listing auctions. So we want to understand, I guess, from our own standpoint, why we would actually do an auction and the benefits to us. And the first step to that, I guess, is unpacking why auctions mean something to us in our marketplace. When we say the word auction, what happens a lot is people picture lots of registered bidders, lots of emotion, lots of screaming, lots of bidding, sale under the hammer, champagne popping, and so on and so forth. Maybe even the TV cameras or Scott Can if you're a fan of The Block. But the reality is that's only the prevalence of auctions in certain markets. And those markets at the moment are probably markets like inner city Sydney, inner city Melbourne, particularly Auckland, I know is going very strong as well. But the reality is that if you don't trade in one of those markets, then you need to understand and probably make peace with the fact that the reason that you go to auction might be a different one from having that big extreme event at the end of the transaction. So what we want to try and do is get that understanding around what is the applicable nature of an auction inside of our marketplace. In an area like Southeast Queensland, which is where I've done most of my auction trade for the last decade, the reason why we take properties to auction here is to make sure that we actually don't make a pricing mistake. So rather than the fact of us expecting to have 10 bidders at the end of the process and have them compete, which would be nice, but doesn't always happen, and in fact rarely happens, the reason why we take a property to auction here is to make sure that we don't make a mistake on pricing at the start that's actually going to potentially cost ourselves or our vendors some money down the line. In other markets, it might be the fact that pricing is really difficult. So it might be that you've got unique properties or a unique marketplace where pricing becomes quite difficult, or it might be a marketplace where your buyers tend to procrastinate. But we're going to work through a few of the reasons why we would go take a property to auction here before we go into the actual dialogue around how do we present that at a listing table to our seller. The first thing I want to talk about is what we call belief triangles or confirmation bias. So confirmation bias or belief triangle is the fact that we form an opinion about something and then we seek out information or evidence to support that opinion that we have. Now we see this unfold in a couple of different ways. The first one is that we have an agent who loves auctions. They just think auctions are fantastic. So therefore, as soon as the best property that comes across their bow, they list that property as an auction. The auction campaign goes well because they've invested in the skill and the understanding of how auctions work. And then heading forward from that moment, what they then do is then they can keep listing auctions because they actually believe that auctions work. The flip side to that is the agent who maybe is a little bit skeptical about auctions. They're very much a private treaty agent. They put all their eggs in the private treaty basket. But occasionally an auction presents itself because either it's a mortgagee or an estate sale or the vendors for whatever reason request it, and they list an auction, but they do it somewhat reluctantly. They think, you know what, I'll give this a go, but I'm not really sold on this whole auction concept. Now, they haven't ever invested in the skills or the development to actually allow them to run an auction campaign effectively. So the auction campaign doesn't go that well. They turn up on the day, they either don't sell it, in which case they feel really negative about it, or they sell it, but it wasn't a great experience and they feel like potentially they could have got more with a private treaty. So then the evidence they've collected is that auctions don't work in their marketplace or don't work for them as an individual agent, and then they won't do auctions heading forward into the future. So what we want to do is make sure that we have an understanding about what is the applicable nature of auctions inside of our business. Now, fundamentally, although I'm an auctioneer and I get compensated to call auctions and talk about auctions, I don't believe as an agent every property you have should go to auction. But I sure as heck don't believe that every property that you have as an agent should be private treaty either. What I do believe, and based upon the understanding and the research of the marketplace that we've been, a variety of marketplaces and different agents, is that the very best agents in just about all marketplaces have an element of both to their business. So they're very strong on the private treaty front because they understand how those work and they understand why they would run a private treaty and how to do them effectively. But just on the other hand, they understand how auctions work and auction plays a role in their business as well. So when they go to a listing table, they're a rounded force that can be versatile enough to mix and match depending on their sellers. And the distinction we need to make here, and I guess the first lesson we want to try and bring across, is that we don't choose our auctions based upon the properties, we choose our auctions based upon the vendors. So certain vendors are going to be very well set up to run auction campaigns with them, others won't be as good. The property in a lot of ways is irrelevant because when you break it down, auction effectively is just a process. It's not an outcome. And this is one of the coaching tips that we put into a lot of the agents that we work really intimately with and a number of the businesses that we work with as well, is to get them to understand that there is a huge difference between the outcome and the process. What happens a lot is when people talk about auction, they always talk about the day. So they talk about the fact that they're afraid that no one's going to turn up. Or they talk about the fact about what about if it doesn't sell under the hammer? Or alternatively, on the positive, all their focus is about, oh, the day is going to be great. I'm going to make sure I have a coffee cart there on the day and the day is going to be fantastic. But in reality, the auction day forms 3% of our campaign, sometimes even less. So it actually isn't that important. Yes, it's important to represent our business in a good way, absolutely. And yes, it can be the final stroke on a good campaign. But ultimately, auction is a process, not an outcome. And when we talk about auction internally in our business and externally with our buyers and our sellers, it needs to be the language that we speak, that it is merely a process, not an outcome. And the difference behind that is that if we attack it as a process, what a process is, it's a series of consistent actions that we deliver. And if we deliver a series of consistent actions, that will deliver a series of consistent results. And the outcome will take care of itself. But if we are hyper-focused towards the outcome, what happens is the process gets neglected. We don't do the things that we should have because we're so hyper-focused on the end result, and then actually it ends up not being as good a campaign as it can be. So one of the sayings that we say to the agencies that we work with very intimately is to say, you need to separate yourself away from the outcome and invest in the process. I'll say that again. You need to separate away from the outcome and you need to invest in the process. Now, one of the companies that we work with, I was down there doing a session with them yesterday. We were talking through this concept, and what they've actually done to make sure that the language they speak inside of their business is correct is they've actually banned calling them auctions, and they're actually now calling them processes. So instead of saying I've listed 2 auctions this week, they say I've listed 2 processes this week. And it may sound funny, and I know it may sound a little bit cliched for someone to go to that extent of doing that, but for them as a business, that's the shift that they need to make. Because what they were doing is they were getting so invested in the day that their emotions were tied to the outcome on the day. Now, the outcome on the day we can certainly influence, but we can't control it. So we need to actually be away from that. What we can control is the activities and the actions that we do inside of the process. So the first thing that we want to say this morning is to make sure that we adopt this as a process, not as an outcome. Our goal is a couple of things, which we're going to run through explaining this, how to explain this to our seller. But our goal, first and foremost, for us as an agent is this. Your goal is to help your vendor understand the market in the shortest possible time frame. Again, simplistically, our goal is to help your vendor understand the market in the shortest possible time frame. That's where auctions live. Now, philosophically, if we think about this, and we talk about a concept that we work on a lot, which is called the gap. So the gap that exists between our seller and our buyer. So statistically, the 2 rules of real estate, which we know that are the same in every single marketplace, every single country in the world, is rule number 1. This is pretty groundbreaking stuff, so you might want to get your pen ready. Rule number 1 is that your sellers will always want more than their property is worth. Not that groundbreaking. Rule number 2, the buyers will always want to pay less than the property is worth. So what we have right from day one is this gap between our 2 stakeholders, or our 2 people that are trying to collaborate to achieve an outcome, which is that our sellers want to sell it for more, our buyers want to buy it for less, and all of a sudden we are the conduit in the middle. So the statistics that we've done on the auctions so far in 2020 or 2020 is that the sellers on average start a campaign 11% above the level they eventually sell it. So 11% is the level that your vendors need to self-correct through your assistance and help, or adjust to get them to actually to be a saleable position to meet the buyer at transaction level. Alternatively, our buyers start 6% below transaction level with their opening offers. So what you have from day one is a gap of 17% between your seller who sits here and your buyer who sits down here. Now, we all know the reasons why sellers want too much for the property. They're emotionally connected to it. They feel it's worth more because the whole marketplace wants it. It's our job to actually get them to understand the market. Now, if we're committed to this, our language needs to reflect this, and our language needs to reflect this with the sellers. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, my role is to do 2 things. Number 1, to give you information. Number 2, to give you a decision to make. Now, we hear all the time that people say, or agents in particular say, oh, my seller should have accepted that offer. I can't believe they're rejecting that offer. That's a cracking offer. They need to accept it. Well, the reason in most of these cases that they're not accepting the offer is that we haven't provided enough context of information around that offer for them to get to understand it. So how auctions philosophically work is it's actually a time mechanism. So auction is a time mechanism, and the timing mechanism is we've got our seller who sits above the market. We're going to have 4 weeks to get them to the right spot in the middle, understanding the market. And our buyers down the bottom here, through competition and emotional attachment to the property, have 4 weeks to rise up into the same space. And we get our seller and our buyer to meet at the same point at the same time to perform the transaction. Now, that's how auctions work. And that's separating away from any sort of outcome. That's philosophically what auctions are all about. It's a timing mechanism to get your seller and your buyer to meet at the same space at the same time. Because the worst thing that we can do, or one of the worst things we can do, is bring a buyer who is ready to buy a property, who enters that transaction level today, to a seller who is not ready to be at that level yet. Because what happens, the buyer comes into that space, they don't hold in that space for very long, they make their offer is rejected, and they leave and they go buy something else. And we know, because we're in touch with the market, to say that was the guy or that was the lady. They were the one who was going to buy this property. Everything about them suggested they were the buyer. My seller just hasn't had enough time to understand the market to meet them at the transaction level. So what we need to do is work on this time mechanism, collect our campaign for 4 weeks, get our buyers emotionally invested in the property and rise through competition. At the same point, get our sellers to understand the market through information and get our seller and our buyer to meet in the middle in 4 weeks' time. And that's how auctions work. So we're going to talk through this, and we're going to talk through, I guess, the power of information with our sellers and how we create that emotional commitment and also that competition element with our buyers as well. But I wanted to talk about that philosophically before we started, because that's my philosophical belief around auctions, and the applicable nature of auctions in most marketplaces is it's actually done for a time mechanism. And what we want to do is we actually want to try and avoid a couple of errors or mistakes that we can make. The first one is the mistake we can make is actually going too fast with our listing and going too slow. And we'll talk through the implications of doing those. But the question I want to ask you today is, if you think about it, where is your next listing coming from? What's going to be the best source, do you think, of you generating your next listing? Because I'm yet to meet an agent who ever says that they've got too many saleable listings. So what we want to try and do is use our auction as a twofold mechanism. Number one, to get our properties sold and get our seller the best price, which is clearly our overarching aim with the campaign. But number two, it is to generate your next listing opportunity. And that's where auctions exist, because they are public listing presentations, which we're going to talk through later on once we talk about the auction day and how we actually present our business. But if you think about it, and if we work on the premise that our best source of our next listing is an existing listing, you can see the flaw in what happens is when we try and sometimes price properties. Because let's put all our cards on the table here, and this is certainly not a private treaty bashing session by any stretch, but there's one flaw, or there's two flaws I think in private treaty. The first one is, we've just said that our best source of a listing is another listing. But what we go and do is we go put a price on a property. So if we put a price of $750,000 on a property, what are you saying to everybody who has $700,000 or less to spend? Do not come to this open for inspection. Alternatively, everyone who's got $800,000 or more to spend, we are saying to those people, do not come to this open for inspection. So what we're doing all of a sudden is we're actually discriminating away from people or preventing people from inspecting our properties, because price is a barrier. That's why price exists. Price is a barrier for the whole and sole reason of excluding people who can afford things or putting into a price category. Because if price wasn't an exclusion tactic, then much like Robbie Tolp, we would all be driving Ferraris. Now, we don't all drive Ferraris because most of us can't afford to drive Ferraris, or we maybe choose not to, or we can't afford to, whatever reasoning it might be. But price is designed as an exclusion tactic. So we can't sit on one hand and say, I'm going to try and get a listing out of this listing and meet as many people as I can, and then on the other hand, put a price on there that's actually going to limit the people who come and see you. So one of the real beauties I think about auction is that it's actually an anti-discriminatory way of selling. Now, that has nothing to do with race, sex, gender, sexuality, anything of that nature. What it has to do with is that it doesn't discriminate against people based upon price. Because the other flaw in our system, flaw number two, is this, that buyers generally, and this is a really good thing to be able to say to sellers, buyers from experience generally go to a mortgage broker at what point? After they've found something and they want to start negotiating and they go to contract. That's the most common entry point for someone to actually get engaged with a broker. So what these people are doing, these buyers, is they're actually making decisions on price, not based upon the actual intimate knowledge of what they've got to spend, just purely based upon this gut feel. And they might be actually excluding inspecting properties that are in their price range, high or low, because they feel that property is too expensive for them, or they feel it's too cheap for them, when it actually might sit inside of their price bracket. They just don't know it yet. So what we want to do ideally is take the price away from it, get as many people through this property as we can, and then we let price become a barrier when it comes to the transaction. Don't let price be a barrier when it comes to your marketing. Price should be a barrier in the transaction or the negotiation or the collaboration, if that's the language you use. Price shouldn't be a barrier in marketing, because our job with marketing is to do two things. Number one, meet as many people as we can to get our next listing opportunity. Number two, get as many people as we can through so we can actually have this competitive environment, which then will actually push the price up. And we do that through weight of numbers. Inquiries, inspections, second inspections, offers, bidders, so on and so forth, heading forward. So we've got to make sure that we actually don't fall into the trap of this habit that can sometimes overtake us, which actually can be that we then make a rush decision around pricing, which can actually hurt us one of two ways. Because the flaw or the challenge that we've got as well is this, that it's really difficult to price properties in this marketplace. It's always difficult to price properties because they can't equate for emotion. The running joke, I think, is that valuers go to uni for 3 years to learn how to value properties, and then they do it by ringing real estate agents, which shows how flawed this process is. But it becomes very difficult to price properties because there's so many variable factors that go into it. The market might be different, the seller's circumstances might be different, the buyer's circumstances might be different, the level of emotional attachment of the buyer might be different in that property. All these factors go into it. What was the level of competition? Not even with counting the fact that at the moment, our marketplace is changing so rapidly on a day-by-day basis that it is impossible to predict what the sentiment of the buyer will be by the weekend. And a great example of this is if you think about it here in Australia, and I know our friends across the ditch are a little bit different, but if you think about it here in Australia, what we've got is this situation where Tuesday afternoon, we all felt good about life. Because what had happened is the JobKeeper and JobSeeker had been extended. Mortgage freeze repayments were going to continue to be in play for a while longer, which just relieved the pressure of what everyone thought was an inevitable cliff that was happening in September when all this was going to actually be stripped away. But there was still uncertainty. So Tuesday afternoon, we're feeling great about life. How good? All of a sudden, you fast forward to Wednesday afternoon and Thursday. Wednesday afternoon, they report that Victoria's had 484 new cases, which is a record for a single amount of cases in a single day, which of course is a negative. Even if we don't live in Victoria, it's naive to think that it's not going to affect, New South Wales or Queensland or any other states as well. And then secondary to that is they actually forecast that the unemployment levels in Australia will be 9.25% by Christmas. So 1 in 10 Australians are going to be unemployed by Christmas. So if you think about the negativity that comes along with that, well, all of a sudden the sentiment of the buyers changes almost overnight because they've gone from this space of happiness in that things are going to be rolling along well to all of a sudden this abject information that slaps them across the face and says, actually, it's not going to go that well. But then on the flip side to that, we had our highest clearance rate here in Queensland last weekend as a business, over 70% that we've had since February. Because there's nothing out there. Supply versus demand. There's a lot of demand or there's good demand, but there's no supply, which means then we're creating a logjam and competition is back in play for property. So it becomes a really fraught with danger exercise to try and price properties. It always is, but it especially is at the moment. And if we put a price on the property right now, there are two risks that we run. Risk number one is that we get it wrong. Our price is too high. We all of a sudden go out to the marketplace with our best marketing and our best marketing investment, and we go with our worst price. And we sit there for the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks and nothing happens. The open homes, we're there, we're playing Candy Crush or Angry Birds, whatever you might be on your phone at that particular time, or you're scrolling Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, MySpace, if you're a little bit behind the times, and all of a sudden the open home's finished. We met nobody, we pack our flag up, off we go. Next week, the same thing happens. Next week, the same thing happens. And we ring our seller and we say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we need to have a strategy conversation. Because we don't ever say we're coming around to do a price reduction. We say we're having a strategy conversation. We sit in front of them, we say, look, clearly we haven't hit on with the market. We need to adjust our price. They say, yep, let's adjust it by $5,000. We get all shriveled up because we think, that's actually not doing much. We need to have a more significant price reduction. And then we eventually drop the price to a more suitable level. By the way, I heard a great saying once, and it said that if you get a price reduction and it is not a significant one, it's like peeing in a wetsuit. It gives you a warm and fuzzy feeling, and then immediately it does nothing after that. So we've got to make sure that if we're getting price reductions, they're significant ones, which is by the by. But what happens then is we go back to the market with a new price. And that we're basically repeating the same exercise again. The price is either right, in which case we might get some interest, or the price might be wrong. So then we waste another 2 weeks or 3 weeks getting our seller back to understand the market, and then we sit back down with them again and we need to review our strategy, and then we do that, and then what happens? all of a sudden we're 42 or 49 or 55 days in to, in most cases, a 90-day agreement. And you've wasted more than half of your agreement time trying to get your seller to understand the market through trial and error, because that's effectively what we're doing. And that process can keep repeating. Now, all the while, whilst we've been trying to get our seller to understand this marketplace, unfortunately, what have they been receiving in the mail? They've been receiving a letter from this company or that company or this company or that company saying, we have the buyers, just sold. We have the buyers, just sold. We have the buyers, which is all done to erode the trust between you and the seller. So it actually behooves us as much as it behooves our sellers to get our sellers to understand the market as quickly as possible, because it's actually a protection on our fee as well. Now, the greatest sin, I think, is actually the opposite, which is we see this all the time on socials. Property sold in 2 days. Bang. 28 groups through, 6 offers, sold in 4 days. And then the next step is we're doing the TikTok, the boomerang, the celebratory, the champagne, whatever might go along with it. And then we go back to our office and we go, what now? And all of a sudden what we've done is we've had a really good listing, a beautiful listing that was going to sell no matter what method of sale you employed. And we've done it in 4 days, which does 2 things. Number one, probably hasn't allowed enough time for competition to create and bubble and actually potentially get a better price. But number 2 is, instead of meeting 28 people, which we got through the first open for inspection, if we'd actually leveraged that property out for 3 or 4 weeks, we probably would have met 65 or 70, which goes back to the statement that we said before, which is our next listing opportunity is coming out of an existing listing. So why do we have this compulsion to try and sell our stock so quickly? We say we want to try and meet as many people as we can, and then we sell it on the first open for inspection. The sold sticker goes up, we get the endorphins, we get the rush or the sold sticker, and then we're back to the exact same square we were before that listing became about. And yeah, you're going to get some commission, happy days, but beyond that, we've actually generated nothing out of that listing. So there's 2 risks that we run. One's going too fast and one's going too slow. So what we need to do with our sellers, I believe, is to get them to understand, when we sit at a listing table, why we think auction is a good way to go. But you'll notice throughout, when we present this to our sellers, we very rarely use the word auction, because the word auction sometimes has some negative connotations attached to it. And what we want to try and avoid is those negative connotations actually coming into play too early. We want to try and build trust and build expertise around what we do first and foremost. So what we want to say to our sellers is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, first and foremost, the elephant in the room I want to clear is that you can do this yourself. You can put a price on the property. You can put a sign out the front. You can wait for someone to come in. You can accept their offer. You can sell it. You're not employing me to sell your home. Why you're employing me is to achieve a premium price on your home. So what we are, in essence, is gap fillers. We bridge the gap between the level that anyone can sell it at and achieving a premium price. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, there is 5 things that we need to tick off to achieve a premium price. We call these the 5 Ps. Conveniently, they're all named, or they all start with a P. Promotion, presentation, process, person, pricing strategy. I'll say those again because I know I talk quickly because I'm an auctioneer. Promotion, presentation, person, process, pricing strategy. Our goal is to kick a goal or tick a box on all 5 of these. And if we do that, we're going to get you the best price that exists out there in the marketplace. Now, we clearly don't have time to go through all of these this morning. I'm conscious of time and not going too far into everyone's day or lunch, as it might be at the present point in time. But the one we're going to focus on is pricing strategy. So the first decision our sellers need to make is very simple. Do we market the property with a price, or do we market the property without a price? So how we do that is actually by presenting them and getting them to understand that the pricing strategy decision is critically important right from the start. And we do that through presenting them the 2 alternatives of how having a price on a property or not having a price on a property affects the buyer or the consumer. And we work on this debate around emotion versus logic. So the first thing around this is that we need to highlight the benefits of marketing a property with a price. So the benefit of marketing the property with a price is that you will receive certainty. Now, the certainty that we receive is that you will get instant feedback as to how attractive your price is to the market. Because if the price is fair and the market deems it as fair, you will receive inquiry and response straight away. If the market deems your price as unfair, you will get nothing. So you'll get an immediate response. The other certainty that price marketing provides is it provides the buyers with a certainty as to what figure they would have to pay to buy the property. Now, my line of thinking around this is that there's only two ways to market a property. We put a price on it, or we take it to auction. Because I firmly believe that if you are a buyer, you need to know a price you can buy the property for, or a day you can buy the property on. And I think these hybrid methods of sale that we see employed a lot, things like for sale or best offers by, all this, what we do is we actually then just start to convolute the marketplace. Why do we try and make it more difficult than what it is? If you're running a new marketing strategy, chances are the buyers you're going to be meeting have never worked inside of that strategy before. So then you've got to actually coach the buyers through your strategy. And if you're having to coach buyers through a strategy, you're actually putting up a roadblock for them to purchase the home. So let's keep it simplistic. Let's provide our buyers a price they can buy it for or a day they can buy it on. So what happens is when there's a price on something, and this is the same for any sort of consumer behavior here in Australia, and I think this is good dialogue to be able to set out in front of your sellers to understand the difference between price marketing and no price marketing. When there's a price on an item, we are trained to go through a certain process to decide whether we buy that item or not. So let's say we've got our morning coffee. So we buy our morning coffee. The price of our morning coffee is $4. The first thought that goes through your head when you see that price is, can I afford it? Affordability is always the first trigger in our mind. Now, when the coffee's $4, it's an immediate thought. Don't even have to think twice about it. But when you go to buy a car or a house or a piece of jewelry or a bit of clothing, that thought can slow down because it might be a longer decision. The next step below afford is negotiate. Can I negotiate the price? Now, we here in Australia actually get trained to not negotiate or very rarely negotiate on price. Whereas a lot of other countries, you go there and things are a lot more negotiable. But in Australia, it's not the case. No one ever tries to negotiate the price of their morning coffee. No one ever says, hey, I see this coffee is $4.50, but I'll give you $4 cash. Settlement straight away. You know, there's other coffee shops, just letting you know I've got other options. No one ever thinks to do that because we get trained that we can't do that. You don't go into Woolworths and then your tally comes up at $128.17 and you say, you know what? Let's call it 110. Here we go, cash, 110, what do you say? Because we get trained that we can't actually negotiate in those situations. But it's the next step in our buying behavior. The third step, so can I afford it? Can I negotiate? The third step, is it good value? So then we start to stack up the price against the other prices or the other bench line of comparison around pricing, around our knowledge in that particular item or that particular sector. So afford, negotiate, is it good value? The last step that we get to after we've done all of that is, do I want it? Now, what we need to say to our vendors is very simple. Real estate is one of the rare exceptions about purchasing behavior. Most purchases are driven by logic, first and foremost. But real estate is a rare exception. Real estate is driven by emotion first. Then it's justified with logic after. So what we need to do is we need to have a method of sale or a marketing strategy that appeals to the buyer's emotional sense first, before any logic or facts and figures comes into play. So this is critical for us to get our buyers to understand this, or get our sellers to understand that the reason we go with no price marketing campaigns is to get our buyers emotionally engaged. Now, our two ingredients to get you the best possible price is an emotional buyer in a competitive environment. Now, it's the same with any sort of method of sale. Our goal is always to find an emotional buyer and place them in a competitive environment. So what we need to have is a method of sale that actually talks the talk and walks the walk behind what we say, and that is appealing to the emotion of the buyer first before that barrier of price becomes an issue. Marketing is designed to get people into stores. Our real estate marketing should have one singular focus, and that is to get as many bodies through your property as we can. Because the more bodies you get through your door, the more opportunities you find or you present yourself to find the emotional buyer. And on the backside of that is the more chance you have to create competition. So let's not limit ourselves with our marketing. Let's take the price off it, because the buyers, when there's no price on something, they can't do the same process. And we get buyers say to us a lot, I hate buying at auction. And there's probably a few reasons, but one of the reasons I believe is that it doesn't allow them to do the same process that they do when they buy a regular item, which is afford, negotiate, value, then they get to want. What happens is we make our buyers go straight to want first. And that's uncomfortable for buyers because they become very accustomed to buying things in the other way. But our job is to get the best for our seller, not necessarily to make it the most comfortable experience for a buyer. And there's certain steps we can do to make it more comfortable, but certainly the seller needs to be our primary focus when it comes to that marketing strategy. So it's this emotion versus logic debate. What we see a lot is that items of value generally are sold with no price marketing. So if you go into an expensive clothing store and you walk in and you turn over the price tag, it's funny, but very rarely do they have prices on them, because what they want you to do is to actually try it on. That's how we fall in love with that item. Further to the line, what we need to do on the back of that is actually look at cars, the way the cars are sold. The singular focus of a car salesperson is to do what with you as a buyer? Get you in for a test drive, because that's where we can start to fall in love with the vehicle. We can't fall in love with the vehicle on the lot. So our goal needs to be actually reflectant of that, to make sure that we actually work on this no price marketing strategy, get our buyers engaged first and foremost before we go forward to the next step, which then becomes about price. But one of the funny things I think about auction, and one of the reasons why I think buyers should actually love auctions more than they do, is that private treaty is about transparency with the price until the point of negotiation. And then as soon as private treaty hits negotiation, all the transparency goes. It vanishes because it's all done behind closed doors. And particularly if you're buying in a multiple offer environment, it is a horrendous way to buy a property. You know, you might get one shot, you've got no knowledge of what anyone else is doing, you've got to trust that the agent's telling you the truth. It's a really unfortunate way to buy property. On the flip side, yes, there's no transparency around price with an auction, but the negotiation is all transparent. It's done in public. So buyers should actually feel better about it, because what they're actually going to be doing is negotiating in a completely fair, open and transparent environment. One of the hidden benefits that I believe behind the auctions. So to finish off, and we've got about 5 or 10 minutes to go in our session this morning, I wanted to talk about why not. So what are the reasons and the objections that sellers throw at you in your marketplace to say, we don't like auctions because of this reason? Now, if you've got any that particularly come straight to your mind, you're welcome to throw them in the chat box, and we'll respond to your one individually. If you haven't got any come to mind, we can just cycle through the ones that we generally see a lot. I've got Jesse here helping me today. Most of you know Jesse in our business. Jesse, I can't see the chat box, just letting you know. So if someone does ask a question, you're going to have to come in and probably signal it or write it so we can respond to it. But most of the common ones that we frequently hear around auctions are firstly cost. So people say auctions cost too much. Now, first and foremost, our marketing campaigns on auctions and private treaties should be identical, because our goal on both of them is to sell a property for the best possible price. So there should be no difference in the marketing campaign per se. What the difference is going to be is an auctioneer's fee, who, as a side note, completely and horribly underpaid. We should form a union. But anyway, that's an argument for a different day. So our cost of our auction campaign should only be the cost of an auctioneer. Now, the role an auctioneer can play on the day, other than all of the fast talk and the description and the nice words they might use, is that they are a third-party negotiator. Now, a third-party negotiator is so powerful because what we have in a room on auction day, or in two different rooms, is you have a buyer who stands to benefit if the sale goes through at a certain price. You have a seller who stands to benefit if the sale goes through at a certain price. And you have an agent who stands to benefit only if the sale goes through, because they're paid upon commission. So the auctioneer being paid a service fee and not getting paid a commission fee allows them to be the conduit to the negotiation, because they're less emotionally invested in the outcome. So the cost that you actually incur, Mr. and Mr. Seller, from an auctioneer is a really small cost when it comes to actually employing that third-party negotiator. And if through the skill of your auctioneer, they can generate one more bid at the auction, the average closing bid at an auction is $2,500. So in most cases, they're paying for their fee twice or 3 times over if they can generate one more bid for you at the auction. Another one that we hear a lot is that we've had a bad experience. We've seen an auction, we went there, it didn't sell, auctions don't work in our marketplace. And this is a really common one, not only for buyers, but also for agents. Not only for sellers, I should say, but also for agents. So what happens with this bad experience is because an auction is a public event, the sellers are very quick to tie the result of that auction to what they actually witnessed. And as agents, we sometimes do the same thing. So we go at 11 a.m. for our auction. The auction doesn't sell. We go, oh, that didn't feel good. Really want to sell that under the hammer. At 1 o'clock, we go to do a listing presentation and we're going to pitch everything other than auction because we don't want to feel that same experience that we had happen this morning. However, we can have a private treaty open home at 11 a.m. No one comes through. We pack our flag up. We go to a listing presentation at 1 o'clock. And what are we going to be pitching to those people? Private treaty. They're both events. Now, one is a more public event, which is why we pair that disappointment to the public event. But the reality is they're both processes. This one ties a lot into clearance rates. People talk to us, particularly here in Southeast Queensland, if you're at a marketplace that isn't overly strong, people say all the time, well, clearance rates. If the clearance rate in Southeast Queensland is 45%, then that statistically means that 55% of properties didn't sell. True, absolutely true. But let's break that down for a second, what that actually means. What that actually means is that 4.5, 4 and then someone of my height, out of 10 sellers, 6, 8, 9 weeks ago, sat down in a lounge room and said, we want to sell our property on this exact date to someone who has no terms and conditions attached to their contract whatsoever. This is the settlement date we want. This is the deposit they have to pay to make that happen. And 45% of sellers got their wish. 45% of sellers got their wish. Their property is now sold and finished on the exact day that they nominated all those weeks ago. It's actually pretty good. Let's have a look at the alternative, the method of sale. So in Southeast Queensland, or in Queensland I should say, the private treaty clearance rate last weekend was 2.5%. So 2.5% of properties that were private treaties got a contract on them by the end of the week. 2.5%. In Sydney, it was 6%. So it shows that Sydney's a stronger market than Queensland, no matter what the method of sale might be. So let's break that down. What that means, Mr. and Mr. Seller, is very clear and simple. That 2.5, out of 100 sellers got a contract on their property on a random day that they didn't nominate. And the buyer will buy it, but only if they are satisfied with the finance, only if they don't cool off, only if they are satisfied with the building and pest inspection and any other diligence clauses they might want. They're going to nominate the deposit that they want to pay and they will settle on the day that they want to settle. Now, which one of those two methods of sale do you feel is more likely to produce a good outcome for you? Because let's be really clear around that. The fallover rate right now is increasing. Banks are becoming increasingly nervous around the values of properties. Therefore, valuations are becoming harder and harder to actually proceed through at the agreed value. And secondary to that is that our buyers in most states are waking up to the fact that the building and pest inspection clause is weighed very heavily in their favour. So here in Queensland, the wording of the building and pest clause is that it's to the buyer's absolute satisfaction, which makes it two things. Number one, a glorified extended cooling off period. Number two, and this is the one that a lot of buyers are waking up to and we need to be really preemptively on to, is they are waking up to the fact that the building and pest inspection is a second negotiation on price. So we need to do a couple of things to circumnavigate this. Number one, our method of sale should encourage our buyers to do the diligence prior to the auction starting. But number two is we've got to make sure that no matter what sort of property you're listing at the moment, preemptive building and pest inspections are critical. Get your seller to invest in a building and pest inspection. It will be the best $400 or $500 they spend because it'll cross out the second negotiation on both private treaty and also on auction as well. So preemptive building and pest inspections are really, really important. So we've got to make sure that method of sale, like we said, reflects the fact that we want to try and deliver the best buyer for our seller. And that best buyer is the one that not only is the best money, but also has the best terms. Because very clear and simple, in a private treaty, the seller carries all the risk of the transaction. In an auction, the buyer carries all the risk of the transaction. Our job is to work for sellers. Therefore, our method of sale should reflect that our buyers have to carry the risk around the transaction. Is there any other objections that you guys frequently face? We'll hang on the line here for a minute or so to see if there's any others that you guys face a lot in your area or in your marketplace. Happy to work through them. Otherwise, we can let everyone shoot off and enjoy the rest of their Friday, hopefully heading into game day tomorrow. So nothing seems to be coming through at this point in time. So the last thing just to finish off with, and coming back to, I guess, our overall message behind our first session, is that it is about getting our sellers to understand the benefits of auctions. But further and deeper to that, it's about us understanding the benefits of auctions to our business on a process level and also on a generating listing opportunities level. What we need to do is we need to make sure that our sales are not only generating commission. Our sales should be generating opportunities as well as commission. Really important one to note. We'll hang on the line for a minute or so. If there's any questions that you guys have that we want to finish off with, you're welcome to stay on. Otherwise, good luck. Enjoy your day today. On behalf of the Auctions Live team and also myself and all the team at Apollo Auctions, we thank you for logging on. Our next session is going to be all about handling inquiry and also running VIP viewings on our listings to make sure we generate those listing opportunities. So we're hoping to see you in a few weeks' time, but please reach out at any stage if you've got any questions. Cheers. The laptop died.
Yeah, that was not bad. 87 was on that.